Hi, my name is Sharvidi and this is my first YouTube video on my first YouTube channel. Ever since I was a child, I've been struggling to sleep well and listening to stories usually helps. So this channel is dedicated to me reading stories out to you. So if you like listening to stories or you like listening to my voice so far, this is a great place to be. The story I'm about to read today is called The Lake and it's written by Kelsey H. It's a mystery story and it's a short story. But before we begin, I want you to relax yourself. Dim the lights in your room, bring your room to an ambient temperature. Lie down in a comfortable position, unclench your jaw, relax your shoulder, close your eyes, and take control of your breathing. Let's begin. The summer I turned 16 and got my license, Kyle Lewis was pulled dead from the lake. It was the week before Christmas and heat pressed down over the town. People went to the lake to cool off, but Kyle didn't drown. There was no water in his lungs. Coming back now, 10 years have passed. Like always, I returned to visit my parents, and I found myself slowing down when I reached the lake. The turn off on the long road which led to their house and then onto the town, I felt myself being pulled towards it, like a magnet lay deep in the center of the lake, drawing me. I stopped and got out of the car and stood there at the side of the road, looking towards the water, the shimmer of the sun on the still surface. Memories rushed back to me. The evening my dad and I spent out in the garage working on the car he'd bought for us to do up. My sister sobbing at our table and my mother comforting her while my father stood silent. The long days of summer and the police and the rumors people whispered to one another. The swagger of the Ryan brothers around the town. And the last day of Kyle's life recounted to the police by those who'd seen him. That day he'd slept until 11. He and my sister Taylor had been drinking late at night. And then woke up to empty bottles and glasses that were still on the bench. The smell of booze hung in the air of their little house. They lived on the same long road as my parents did, but further into the town. I passed their house each day as I biked from home to school, dreaming of the day my car would finally be ready. Kyle was hungover, and he sat on the couch and rolled a cigarette while Taylor made them coffee. She asked if he wanted to eat, but he said no. He wasn't hungry. He was quiet, and she knew he was worried. He was worried because he owed Dean Ryan and his brother Pete some money, and they were getting impatient. When told this, the police wanted to know what he owed them for. Taylor said he bought some car parts off of Pete Ryan and hadn't paid him yet. But eventually she told them the truth. The truth. But then he'd been found and lay cold in the morgue, and she wasn't worried. She wasn't worried what would happen to him because it already had. Kyle drank his coffee that day, smoked 2 cigarettes, one after the other, and he showered, pulled on a jeans and a navy t-shirt that he would eventually die in. He told her he was going to visit a friend and drove out the way he always did, tires squealing, sending up a cloud of dust which still hung in the air. At the mobile on the corner, he pulled in to buy more cigarettes and an energy drink. While he stood there at the counter, Pete Ryan walked in and came up to him. "I'm coming to collect today," Pete said. At least that's what the cashier heard. She didn't know what it meant. She said Kyle didn't reply, or if he did, she didn't hear it. Or maybe she knew, but like we all knew, none of us wanted to get on the wrong side of the Ryan brothers. My dad had gone to high school with them both, in the same year as Dean, who was the oldest. He said even back then they were raising hell all over town, making a name for themselves. After Kyle left the mobile, he came to ask my father for money. When he pulled in, Dad and I were in the garage, tightening the brakes in the car. We'd spent the last 6 months working on it. Just like he'd promised it would be, now that I could drive it almost. Anyway. Kyle got out and my dad looked at him, something cold coming over his expression. He stood silent and waited. "Can we talk?" Kyle asked him. They headed inside the kitchen. A minute later, I followed and sidled up to the door. Stood silent, hardly breathing. Dad was standing against the bench with his arms folded, Kyle in front of him with desperation sliding off of him. "Please, I won't ask you if I had anyone else to go to. I swear to God I'll pay you back. I just owe Pete for this car I bought off of him." My father cut him off with a hard laugh. "That piece of shit you're driving, that's not even worth 500, let alone 5,000. You come here begging for money. At least have the guts to not lie about it." A liar was one of the things my father despised the most. Almost as much as he did a man who would hit a woman, and my sister's boyfriend was both of those things. "Alright, but it's not what it sounds like," Kyle said, his tone thin and pleading. A way I'd never heard him speak to my sister. For her, he'd never crawled. "I sold some pot for them, and I owe them money from it. It was a one-time thing. I just gotta get square with them." It was a version of the story I'd heard, which was that he'd been selling for a long time for them, and he'd only skimmed a small amount, but they'd added interest. Dad stood up straight from the bench, and even though he was the same size as Kyle, he seemed to loom over him. "You want me to fix your mess now? What sort of a man are you?" It was a question both asked and answered in a scathing tone. A liar, a coward, the worst kind. I knew exactly what sort of man my father was, what he expected me to be. A man who was strong, who didn't cry or complain, who took care of his family. Then my dad spoke again. "I know what kind of trouble you're in. I'll pay the Ryan brothers off for you, and you leave town. Leave my daughter. That's the deal." Kyle made an odd noise, helpless and angry sounding. "You can't just tell me to leave town." The words weren't all the way out, and my father had him around the collar, slammed him back against the wall. "You think I give a shit if Dean Ryan finishes you off? You're in my house now. If I see so much as a scratch on my daughter again, I'll break your bones." Then he stepped back, folded his arms again, as if the moment had never happened. Everything fell still. The only sound was a fly buzzing against the window, loud and frantic, quite like Kyle. Kyle stayed slumped against the wall, eyeing my father, indecision in his clenching and loosening fists. Then, without another word, he turned and left. Saw me there in the hallway, and his eyes met mine, knowing I'd witnessed it. His moment of humiliation. He pushed past me roughly, shoving his shoulder into me. I felt a shiver of apprehension then. Not for myself, but my sister. My father had wounded him, but she would bleed for it. He left our house and went back to his, driving fast up the long road which ran between us. He was tense when he got back, pacing, smoking in the kitchen. He and Taylor argued. She told the police. They argued because he asked if she could leave town with him and she said no. She didn't want to leave her family. He told her if she really loved him, she would go with him. While they were arguing, she tripped over and hit her face against the bench and split her lip. Later that day, Kyle drove the short distance into town and went into the pub, which Dean and Pete Ryan didn't drink at. He got drunk, started talking big, saying he wasn't scared of the Ryan brothers. He had a knife and he was ready to kill whichever one came to him first. About 9 in the evening, the doorman kicked him out. He was marched outside and told to walk it off and come back for his car in the morning. The doorman stood there and watched him leave. He was the last to see him before he was pulled bloated and broken boned from the water. His unsteady walk as he headed down the road which led him to his own house and past that my parents' house. And if he'd kept going further, still the lake. The next morning, the car was there on the street still. Kyle not in his bed. My sister started phoning around to see if anyone knew where he was. 2 days later, his body rose up to the surface of the lake and was spotted by a man out fishing. Both Ryan brothers were pulled in for questioning. People saw them being escorted to the station. After seeing Kyle at the mobile, Pete Ryan had gone to spend the afternoon watching his son play cricket. He stood on the sideline and watched him make run after run, and after he'd taken him out for dinner. Then he dropped him back to his mother's house and gone around to his brother Dean's house. He and Dean sat outside in the warm night and drank a box of Woodstock, sometime about midnight. He couldn't remember for sure. Dean headed to the bed and Pete stretched out on the couch and went to sleep. They were each other's alibis. Nothing ever linked them to the lake. Still, many in the town believed it was them. Others said there was no sense in the brothers killing him over a few $1,000s. After all, now they were never going to get their money back. They said Kyle pissed plenty of people off and maybe he mouthed off to the wrong person as he made his way back home. The police came to our house the day after he was found to speak. The police came to our house the day after he was found to speak to my father. They sat in the lounge as the fan stirred air overhead, and I passed them cans of lemonade from the fridge. Dad told them about Kyle asking for money, coming over while we were working out there on the car, and he nodded his head towards it, the freshly painted Ford. Then one of the cops shook his head and laughed, looked at my father. "You can't have been too pleased to have your daughter shacked up with him," he said. "I sure wasn't," my dad replied. "I wish he'd lied then. For his own sake. Not admitting that he hated his daughter's murdered boyfriend. But Dad always said, your word is all you have. Be someone people can trust. There's no one on this earth I trust more than him." It was a story now, a decade later. The haunted lake. The kids who swam out there claimed they felt a sort of grab at their legs under the water. He was always trying to be someone big in town, Kyle Lewis. And eventually, he was. Every time I visited, Dad and I would drift out to the garage after dinner, just like we used to, when I was a kid still living at home. There was something soothing about being out there with him, the petrol scented concrete, and the glow of the fluorescent light. The way we understood one another without having to speak. My childhood was something unending there. Dad took 2 beers from the fridge in the garage and passed me one, and we stood drinking, looking towards the road. It was quiet. I wondered if he felt the pull that I felt with the lake. Do people still think it was the Ryans who killed Kyle? I asked, not looking at him. We never spoke of it. Yeah, I guess so, he said. People don't talk about it anymore. I remember the day Kyle was pulled from the lake, the convoy of police cars driving past as we stood there in the garage. The solemnness of their cars and sirens and lights, and the scraping sound of my dad scrubbing sandpaper all over the car. The stark look of metal underneath the old paint. Dad stopped, they might see. I begged him. He paused only long enough to look up at me. Everyone knows we've been doing this car, son, he said. No one will think a thing about it. He was right, of course. Everyone was too busy looking at Dean and Pete Ryan. The police looked right at the car as they sat in our house, looked away again. My dad bought a new headlamp to replace the smashed one and took the car in for a new paint job. After he banged out the dent, and no one ever said a thing except to ask what color he wanted. But for all those years afterward, when I went to the lake, I couldn't stop myself imagining it. My dad in the darkness, hauling the body from his car, carrying him over the stones so as to not leave a trail. And how he did that, I still don't know. He dropped him in all the way round the far side where trees grew low into the water, where no one would swim, and it was time enough before he was found for what evidence there had been was lost. I could only imagine it because I had sworn to never speak of that night to anyone, not even him. The memory I carried was buried inside me, of driving up the road to test the brakes on the car and rounding a corner, seeing him there, the animal look of him in my headlights, the drunken lumber, the glowing eyes, and for an instant, I saw again him barging me in the hallway of my house, hitting my sister in his own house. There was a moment I could have braked, but I didn't. I could have swerved, but I didn't. My dad was there in minutes after I called him, stood with me looking at the lifeless shape of Kyle Lewis on the side of the road. There was a sound of something deep in the night. Then he put his hand on my shoulder, looked at me steadily. Listen to me. This is my fault. I was the one driving. You got that? You can never speak about this again. Do you understand? He pressed his own keys into my hand, ordered me to drive his car home and shower and go to bed and forget this ever happened. I got into his car and saw in the rearview mirror the car there on the side of the road, my father beside it, phone in his hand. That moment was the end of my first life. The hazy days of childhood where anything felt possible. The life which came after was both darker and clearer. The knowledge of exactly what I was. Who'd you call that night? I asked him. I've always wondered. I didn't know if He'd answer. I'd made a promise to him. And that was what we did. We kept our word. He protected me all these years. I called Dean Ryan, told him I hit someone on the road and I needed his help. We go back a long way, me and him. He helped me dump him out. He nodded his head towards it, the lake. We couldn't see it from here, but could feel. It was something which would always be there between us. The dark magnet of the past, pulling at us. What you have to do for him? Dean Ryan did no favors. He gave and you paid for it. My dad looked at me again, and I felt the weight of all the things I didn't know. It was bad for him. Everyone seeing Kyle still walking around after ripping him off. I paid off Kyle's debt to him, and he let people think what they wanted. I thought then of Dean Ryan's long silence, denying or admitting nothing, the silence which had grown between me and my dad, all of us bound by it. That night, I had known, as I always had, my father would do anything to protect me, because I knew the sort of man he was, one who took care of his own, same as I was. That's where our story comes to an end. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I hope you're either asleep or getting there, at least on your way. I really enjoy mystery stories, and the next month I'd like to post another mystery story. I'm planning to post every month, whenever I get time, whenever I get a good story. So I'll see you soon. Thank you.